What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for Sports. All right, so now that we're in the postseason of Major League Baseball, I want to talk a little bit more about baseball players um, from a historical standpoint. So I want to talk about Reggie Jackson, who's one of my favorite players. He was a little bit before my time, but he was one of my favorite players that I ever read about. This guy was the epitome of clutch, especially in the postseason, especially in dramatic fashion, which is why he was given the nickname Mr. October. I do want to mention this, though. I do want to note the passing of Eddie Robinson. Eddie Robinson was the oldest living Major League Baseball player. He was 100 years old. Up until recently, he was still giving interviews, talking about his time in Major League Baseball. He wrote a book several years ago called "My 65 Years in Major League Baseball," I believe it was called, or in baseball. Eddie Robinson was an all-star. He was a great manager for many years, decades in uh, baseball. He was the last living member of the 1948 Cleveland Indians World Series championship team. And I believe that Eddie Robinson, who was born in 1920, was the last living major leaguer to have served in World War II. So that generation is quickly leaving us, the so-called greatest generation that survived both the Great Depression and a world war that nearly altered the course of history. So I wanted to give a shout to him. He was 100 years old. I mean, so you can't really feel bad about his death. But I just wanted to note his life, celebrate his life a little bit. So now let me go to Reggie Jackson, okay? So Reggie Jackson um, played 21 seasons in the majors. I believe he played for the Oakland Athletics, two different stints. The main stint coming beginning of his career, and I think the last two seasons, I think, of his career, he played for the Oakland Athletics. Then, of course, he played for the New York Yankees, and I believe he played for the Anaheim Angels. Well, I think at the time, excuse me, not the Anaheim Angels. Now they're the Los Angeles Angels, but at the time they were the California Angels. That's back when Gene Autry, the actor slash cowboy, whatever the fuck, owned them. He also played, people forget this, he played one season with the Baltimore Orioles. He played 1 year with them. I think it was 1976. It was not a happy tenure with that team, from what I could understand. His general numbers are very impressive. He had 563 home runs. He drove in 1,000, I think, 702 career RBIs or runs. I guess I should say not RBIs. His batting average of 262. It's not great. It's not great. He received a lot of flack for that, and he struck out a measly record 2,597 times. Now, let me say this about the criticisms about Reggie. Some of the criticism that he's overrated as a power hitter. Um, he only had two seasons of 40 home runs, and that he never had consecutive 30 home run seasons. His home run at bat ratio is 17.5. He hit a home run every 17.5 at bats on average. That's like 60. That's like in the. It's like I think it's like 66 or 67 of all time. You know, the number one guy is Mark McGwire. Number two, Babe Ruth. Number three is Barry Bonds. And then after that, I think it's like Jim Thome, Giancarlo Stanton, who's still playing today. And you got some other guys. So there's a lot of guys ahead of him. A lot of guys as far as home run ratio. I do want to say this about uh, Reggie Jackson defense. We've seen now that analytics does prove that batting average and strikeouts are not as detrimental as people have made it out to be. And that what's more important in winning baseball is being able to drive in runs. That's why guys like Mark McGwire, guys like Reggie Jackson, guys like Harmon Killebrew, guys like Darryl Strawberry, when you look at the course of their careers, when they have their MVP seasons or their best seasons, if they were surrounded by talent, generally those teams were playoff and maybe even World Series contenders, as opposed to some guys who are great singles hitters and great hitters for average. But, you know, oftentimes their their teams may need some other factors. They need some power. They need some great pitching. Look, the then Anaheim Angels back in 2002, they primarily won that World Series off of their offense. They had a lot of power hitters like Troy Gloss and others. They had some great guys who were just great all around hitters like Garrett Anderson and some of those other guys. But if I remember correctly, their pitching wasn't all world, but they primarily won because of their offense, which is kind of unusual. That's the point I'm trying to make here. In today's world, Reggie Jackson's strikeouts would not be as seen as detrimental. Now, does anybody want to strike out 200 times a season? No. Does anybody want to hit 250? No. But let me say this. Who knocks Harmon Killebrew? Harmon Killebrew has the lowest batting average for any player who's hit over 500 home runs. 256 batting average for his career. But I don't really see too many people knocking Harmon Killebrew. You know what I'm saying? The great Minnesota Twins player. So why did they knock Reggie Jackson so much? Now you could also say Reggie played a little bit too long. Reggie played a little bit too long. If you look at if you take away, I know some people like this game where you say if, when, or whatever, but seriously though, if you look at his best years from 1967, really honestly 1968, but I'm going to put 67 to 82, his career batting average jumps up to 272, which is a lot more respectable. I'm not saying it's great, but it's more respectable when it's in the 270s. His slugging percentage goes north of 500, and his overall averages, they look a lot better. Now, we also have to remember that Reggie played in an era that is sometimes called the second dead ball era. And by that I mean scoring was down, pitching was more dominant in the 70s into the 80s. You didn't really start seeing an uptick in home runs until the late 80s and 90s. That's when you started seeing guys who, unbeknownst to Major League Baseball, were taking substances. And, you started seeing, some evidence that the balls were coming more juiced. Some people, for instance, suspect that the 1987 season that the baseball was juiced. Not the players per se, but the baseball. There's some evidence to support that because for some reason that year, even though Mark McGwire, who was a prolific home run hitter later on, proved that he wasn't a fluke, he hit 49 as a rookie. For some reason, you had guys like, what was it, George Bell hit 47. George Bell had never displayed that type of power before, not that type of power before or since. Andre Dawson, who was a decent home run hitter who would give you 25 to 30 home runs a year, I think. That year, he hit 49 for the Chicago Cubs. So, but when Reggie Jackson played, um, a great power season was 35 home runs. A phenomenal power season was 40. No one was really hitting 50 home runs. There was one guy who hit 50 home runs that decade, and that was George Foster with the Cincinnati Reds. He hit 52. Before that, it had been 12 years. That was Willie Mays in 1965. So Reggie was playing in an era where guys just weren't hitting a lot of home runs. Reggie only had comparable to the other eras. Look, if you look at the numbers, right? If you look at the numbers for each decade, the most power happy decade was the 30s. I think one of those years, the league average now was 300 as far as hitting. Like literally every hitter on average is hitting 300 or better. Compare that to now, where the league average is probably like 245. Or even in the 90s when that was considered high back in like 98 or 99 when the league average was 271. So you really have to factor in a lot of different things when you look at players and you look at eras. You got to look at the equipment, you got to look at the stadiums, you got to look at uh, the bats these guys are using. You got to look at you know as far as the rules are concerned. You got to look at evidence of whether the baseball is being juiced or not. Later on, whether the players are being juiced. But Reggie Jackson, I strongly believe that if you took Reggie Jackson and you put him in the 1990s, Reggie was already 6 feet and 210 pounds. To give you a comparison to Reggie, Sammy Sosa, when he was possibly juiced, was 6 feet and 225. You add 15 pounds of muscle to Reggie Jackson, and you put him in a league where the ballparks are much smaller, not hitting in Oakland where it was not that easy to hit home runs at that time. You put him in a ballpark like Colorado, and I guarantee you Reggie could easily hit 50 to maybe 60 home runs because of his power. Um, Bill James, who is a baseball historian, rates Reggie Jackson as one of the top 10 prolific hitters as far as power that the game has ever seen. Like I said, there's other factors you have to look at rather than just home runs. Look, when Reggie Jackson retired in 1987, right, he didn't go out gracefully. He struggled. He staggered out of the league, okay? He did not resemble the Reggie Jackson that we saw in Oakland and New York. So a lot of people kind of were focusing on the last few bad years, but were forgetting the great years. They were forgetting what this guy was made of. When Reggie retired, he was, let's see, at that time, Hank Aaron, uh, Willie Mays, Frank Robinson, Harmon Killebrew. He was fifth. When Reggie Jackson retired, he was fifth all time in home runs. That's how high he used to be on that list. Um, and there was no evidence he ever cheated. He didn't cheat the game. If you ever want to criticize him, was he, look, was he an impatient hitter at times? Yeah. Was strikeouts a problem with him? Yes. Um, was he streaky? Yeah. There were times when Reggie could go a month and look horrible. But then there were times when Reggie could carry single-handedly. He could carry a franchise for a month when he got it going. Um, 1981, I think, was an incredible year for Reggie Jackson. I believe it's the year he hit 41 home runs. I think that's the only year he hit 300, if I'm not mistaken. He was either 80 or 81. But one of those years was the only year that he hit 300 as a hitter. He had a remarkable year for Reggie Jackson. Was he egotistical? Was he a grandstander? Was he all of these things that kind of annoyed people at that time? Yeah, he was. But he backed it. Reggie, who was only a 262 career hitter in the regular season, hit 357 in the World Series for his career. For his career. Not just for a series. Not for a couple of series. For his entire fucking career in the World Series, this guy hit 357, if I'm not mistaken. And we all remember that particular game in 1977, which I think was the championship clinching game. When he hit Three consecutive home runs off of three pitches. I mean, it was one of the most remarkable things that we had seen. As a matter of fact, that home run that he hit to dead center is one of the hardest hit balls I've seen in a World Series game. I think that pitch probably went something like 450 feet dead center. And, Reggie was for a while, man. Look, man, to play in New York with that pressure under George Steinbrenner and having to deal with Billy Martin and to be able to produce the way he did when the city needed him. Remember, New York was struggling mightily in the 1970s, as a city with crime, with corruption, being bankrupt. The spirit of the city was down. And then you have Reggie Jackson come over, and he promised that he was going to deliver a championship, and he did better than that. You know what I'm saying? He wasn't Babe Ruth. He wasn't perhaps that great a baseball player as far as his numbers are concerned compared to the Babe Ruth or Barry Bonds. But when it came to clutch, he was as great as anybody. And there's some people that I remember, some years ago they were talking about, why they thought he wasn't a Hall of Famer. They said that defensively he had his holes and he wasn't a committed fielder and he was lazy out there. All of these, slightly racist overtones to shit. You know what I'm saying? Um, all in all, I'll put it like this. I don't know how the hell you could think that Reggie Jackson's not a Hall of Famer, but some of these other clowns have gotten in. You think that they're Hall of Famers. You know what I'm saying? So that's all I got to say on this one, man. I just want to do a video talking about Reggie Jackson, one of the great ball players that I've ever seen. And I never saw him live, but I've seen footage of him. I've read about him extensively. I've listened to people who watched him talk about him with live, not just game footage. So, tell me what you guys think, especially you guys who actually saw the guy play.